Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast, and joining me today is frequent guest contributor and, dare I say, co-host to Mage the Podcast, talking about the mechanics of the games we have chosen to love, Victor Kinzer. Victor, how are you doing?
I am doing absolutely great.
Today, we are going to talk about three things: how to prepare for a session 0 and what that is, how to prepare for a session 1 and what that is, and how to prepare for a session N. So anything that's not going to be the tier-filled session where you decide that the Chronicle is done and we will never see each other again. And this is going to be part of our ongoing series on how to mage gooder. This is probably a storyteller-focused one, but to me, almost anything that you can instruct a storyteller how to do is going to be at some point useful to a player, if only to give insight into why the dink are they asking this. A session 0 is a session that occurs before proper play. It has the intent of going over logistics, determining what the game is going to be, figuring out where everyone stands regarding the major elements of it, and if it is a new Chronicle, having the players meet each other. So it takes care of some framework questions, some logistical questions, and some social questions. And to me, for this, step 1 is generally review lines and veils. These are the things that are not going to appear in our game, and the things that can happen in our game, they just need to be off screen. I generally ask players to have a conception of who their character is ahead of time, and I ask them who they feel their character is and some things they think their character can do. If the players have already kind of picked a few magic dots, I'm like, can you tell me what 1 or 2 of your effects look like? I spend a lot of time figuring out what players want or what they think they want. So one of my questions is always, when your character has the spotlight and is doing something cool, what does that look like? And to me, there are kind of 4 answers. Do they have a big dice pool? Do they do the thing that helped the group succeed? Some people want to be the linchpin, where they are the bookworm that found the true name. They don't need to read it, and they don't need to fire the bolt of Michael that will kill the demon, but they feel really cool that they found the Neo-Assyrian manuscript that had it. They got to describe something cool. Maybe a player just wants to play up what their focus looks like, or what their magic looks like, or an interaction that they had, or someone wants to say something witty or respond to something well. These are all different ways that a player can say, this is when I feel like my character has the spotlight and is being cool. I ask about what emotions they'd like the game to inspire. I used to ask for themes and moods, but that has never quite worked out. So I just kind of write down all the feelings, and I'll ask a few follow-up questions. Like if they say, I would like the game to be exciting, I say, can you tell me a time when you were excited playing a game and what was happening then? And that kind of gives me some insight. If it's an experienced group, I will go over game tenets, which is to say, these are the principles by which I run the gaming universe by. They are general guidelines. And then I will ask a bunch of questions about the game. One of the key ones to me is, how much infra-group strife is there going to be? To what degree are the characters at each other's necks? What is the mix of magical and mundane activities? I, as time goes on, am less and less interested in Hogwarts games, where it is mostly mages dealing with other mages about magey stuff. How supernatural do they want the world to be at large? What does the dark in World of Darkness mean? This can be, they are just characters that act in the shadows. They are it is our world, but there are secret superheroes, more or less. There's a lot of weird stuff in the shadows. There's a lot of weird stuff in the shadows, and it's bad, which I call the Chronicle of Darkness take on it. Bad things can just happen out of nowhere, and you have to keep your wits about you, or things kind of suck. And it seemingly, the World of Darkness as delivered in the text kind of moves between those last 3, depending on what version you do. I like the idea that there is a boring, mundane world that looks remarkably like ours, but if you choose to scratch below the surface, there is some wonder, but also a lot of danger. But generally, the danger doesn't come looking for you unless you have done something. I ask, how quickly would you like your characters to progress? I am in my late 30s. Most of my games are meeting every other week or every 4 weeks. And plot needs to move, or the characters need to move, or everyone needs to be comfortable with it being a relatively meditative game, because if you're going to meet for 4 hours every 4 weeks or something like that, there's only so much game that can happen. And finally, kind of like, how long do we want this to go? I generally don't do just open-ended games anymore. It is usually something where they say, I'm probably good from like December, and then work gets really busy in May. So we got this 5-month window. How much mage can we bang out? And in addition, I have a bunch of logistic questions. When do we make the go, no-go decision if we are meeting in person? How often do we like to meet? How do we feel about side scenes? Side scenes are when a player or a pair of players get to have one-on-one time with the storyteller to advance their personal character arcs. This is different from downtime. It is just a small session that includes fewer players. The tricky part with side scenes is it can frequently allow characters to advance much faster if they are making a wonder or establishing a spirit patron relationship or trying to track down a mentor. Do we want to have arcs that wrap up each session? I kind of put this on the Dungeons and Dragons versus Blades in the Dark spectrum, where D&D doesn't really have, to me, an episodic notion to it, where Blades in the Dark is a game where at the end of every session, everyone should be back at whatever their hideout is, counting the money or licking their wounds. And now, do we want to rotate between in-person and remote? Before we talk about relationships, Victor, what does your session 0 tend to look like?
My session 0 isn't terribly different from this. I think it's just adjacent to it. So the logistics stuff is spot on, exactly the same. The thing that I think I do a little bit less of is the high-level theme stuff. What is the darkness, in World of Darkness to you? Questions like that. And it's because I've had a lot of players in my local gaming group that are just a little bit timid about that stuff. They're new to role playing, or they're new to the World of Darkness. And they're just kind of like showing up to be like, I don't really know what to expect. What's going on? And I find that even, just getting kind of the basics out of them, how to build a World of Darkness character as opposed to like a D&D character, they're really different things in a lot of ways. A D&D character can have all the stuff that matters to a World of Darkness character, but if you leave out all the stuff that really matters in the World of Darkness, you still have a playable archetype and it works. And so, whereas if you leave all that out of a World of Darkness character, you're walking around with 3 disciplines or a handful of spheres, and you're not really imbuing that much character into your paradigm. It doesn't work in the World of Darkness the same way. So a lot of times I'm sort of playing more of an instructive role of like, here's kind of what it means to play here. But then on the other end, I'll have that one player that's been playing since first edition, and like they have this very sort of structured view of things, and I'm kind of trying to thread the needle between them. So a lot of what I tend to try to do is just set the standard of what's the level of the game? What are everyone's expectations? Certainly what's going to make you feel like you've accomplished something. I try to get in on that. I always try to do stat sheet building at session 0, because I've had too many games before I started doing session 0s where like 3 people overinvested in correspondence. And then they all kind of felt like, oh, the other girl is wearing the same dress as me to prom and I don't feel special. And so having everyone come in and say, think of a few things you might like to have, don't build your stat sheet, and then we'll talk about what roles need to be filled in the group. The other thing I like about that question about what roles need to be filled, what powers need to be filled, is I find the players start talking to each other about like, oh, well, what are you going to do with entropy? And they kind of work out between them. What are we going to do? How are we going to solve things? It's not perfect. It's never the reality of what happens at session 1, but it lays a foundation. And I like to kind of push my players to interact with each other and not, play as little guiding hand as I can get away with playing. A lot of times, especially with new players, I have to play guiding hand. There's no way around it. Usually it'll start with me asking questions like, I always want to ask, how much do you want it to be this game? How much do you want it to be the World of Darkness? Obviously, Mage of the Podcast. I just did this with a Mage game. How much do you want this to be Mage? How much do you want this to be World of Darkness? And most recently, I had basically everyone at the table shrug, like, I don't know, why does that matter? And then one person said, well, I like the themes to stay in game. And I went, okay. He said like 80-20. And I went, okay, cool. So a vampire will show up occasionally. You will never have to care about vampire politics. They're just going to show up as the scary thing in the night that you have to deal with as a bygone, basically, kind of thing. Because I do like running the big multi-game, mythic level conceptual stuff, but all the games I've run like that, there'll usually be 2 or 3 people who also really, really love that stuff. And then that one player that's just wide-eyed the whole time. And so when I started doing session 0, it's like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. What does everyone actually want this to be about? So I definitely try to focus on that. And then I try to have the group build common resources. So I really like the chantry building system. I don't love the system, but I love the exercise of everyone building this thing they share that they all kind of have ownership from. I've fallen into the trap before where on the sheet it's a shared resource, but narratively one person owns it. And I've done away with that in the most recent game. I made the ownership sort of a self-maintained mystical thing. It owns itself and has graced you all with being chosen to be part of it. And one that played into the themes of the game, very street level, very we don't own anything. We're finding a niche to survive in, but also nobody feels like they can push anybody else around about how they use their chantry. But they got to make collective decisions. And then I got to ask, okay, cool, what enchantments? So you want some defenses. How does it defend you? It starts to spark ideas in their heads about their own paradigm. You see, like, well, what sort of thing would my character have? And I really like getting those wheels turning in a low stakes brainstorming session. So they're not like, oh my God, I'm in a fight. How do I use forces 3? That's more stressful. But if they've already done a little bit of it, then it's easier to do that kind of improv paradigm. What does this instrument actually mean in practice kind of moment?
That seems like it will lead into the question of how do you figure out the web of relationships within your game? For me, I generally say that each character should have a direct connection to at least one other character, and each character should have a shared want or desire or opposed want or desire with another character. So a reason you know someone and a reason you may or may not get along with someone else that's kind of there from the jump. I generally then ask a series of leading questions of what each player thinks their character thinks about something else in the world. Marshall, how does Evelyn, the Witch of Broad Street, view Kelly's Sumerian worship, or Ashnor? Damien, when Clancy faces a challenge for which he's clearly outmatched, how does he respond, and when has that gotten him into trouble? This can be a chance to establish background scenes, like things that we agree have happened. Like, what was the event that caused Sophia and Banks to become friends? And that tends to be kind of the improv-y, semi-freeform thing that I use to figure out what the group wants itself to be. And then the other key thing for me is to figure out what the mix of storyteller provided versus player provided plot is. Sometimes when people are like, I don't know what the plot of my mage game should be, I'm like, what does that even mean? Cards on the Table, I love Invisible Sun, and that is a game fundamentally about choosing character arcs, so your character gets into the world already having a trajectory. Again, I ask more leading questions. Would anyone like to have a plot involving their family? A lot of people play RPG characters as if they are like parthenogenic, asexual characters who just are kind of in the world and have no romantic or familial relationships with anyone else. Is there a special place that anyone would like to visit? Does anyone have a character that would be particularly interested in visiting a Horizon realm? If so, do you have an idea of what one? What is something that is achievable, that is meaningful to your character? And if it is going to be a full sandbox game, what are the character arcs? And they are going to be of the form, character name wants to accomplish something in order to whatever their motive is. These are an opportunity to allow players to insert things into the narrative of the world. So a character can say, Lasha wishes to cleanse the node at Clark Park to reclaim it for the Fellowship of the Twining Serpents. And now when that character has said that, I now know there's a node at Clark Park, and there's something called the Fellowship of the Twining Serpents that I need to figure out what those are, and that may create additional questions. Michael wants to stop the progenitors from accessing the Tree of Life located within the Morris Arboretum, because if they do, they will destroy it. Well, I need to figure out what the downside of destroying it is, what this Tree of Life is, and why Morris Arboretum is special. Zara plans to start a new ashram near the Navy Yard as she feels a spiritual void in that place that is wounding the city. Okay, how does that character feel that a wound to the soul of the city manifests mechanically? I now need to figure out how zoning works in that area, because I don't know about you, but whenever people ask what the most common thing that Nefandi do in the world of darkness, I say, take over zoning boards. And that, to me, those set of questions also gives me my initial list of entities and other characters that need to exist in the world in addition to what's on character sheets as their background, and how to kind of start things. Where are you on the so how does everyone know each other spectrum?
So I start from a very similar place to what you described in terms of everyone should have some opinion about one other person, why they either like them or dislike them, know them. I also really like to pull out common motivations in session 0.
Mhm.
And I don't necessarily require every single person to be part of the network as long as there's a very obvious vector in. I mean, there's a place for the new character who's walked into a previous, set of relationships and incorporating that. In the current game that I just started, I have 4 mages that have pre-existing relationships, and then this chantry, as I mentioned, that sort of chooses its residents, and then they just find their way there. And one of the residents left off screen just before the Chronicle started, and the replacement is showing up serendipitously as these things happen. And so that character is walking in being like, well, there's a reason I'm here. There's a room that was prepared for me. And like these various serendipitous things pointed me there. And I sort of knew the last guy who left and outgrew the place. What does that all mean? But we did talk about, what are your motivations? What are you interested in? Why might you have been pulled in? It's a little bit of more of an abstraction. So everybody knows we're going to tell this story of integrating this new person into this pre-existing unit. I struggle a little bit with some of what you described in terms of what are your motivations and having the players say, oh, I want to cleanse this node, so it's available to this faction. A lot of my players have either fallen into the, I know too much about the lore. I know storyteller level amounts about the lore, and it almost becomes a bit of a cage, or I have no idea what's going on. I feel a little bit overwhelmed. This isn't a mage example, but occasionally in Changeling, I get both. I know absolutely everything about the world of darkness that you could ever possibly imagine, and that's the only way I'm comfortable playing, except I've never cracked a Changeling book, and now I'm going to try to play Changeling. Hardest player in the world to deal with. I don't know how to not know what's going on. I have no idea what's going on. It's not a great mix. I've had that happen twice.
We have had our session 0. We've taken a whole bunch of notes. Is there anything you like to keep in mind as you build a game?
I think some of what I'm about to describe applies to all games. Some of it really only applies to Mage or other games that are as free form as Mage. So I've run a lot of Vampire, a lot of Mage, and a lot of Changeling. And in Mage, the thing that I tend to do when I'm going to start a new Chronicle, I spend a fair bit of time drafting up NPC backstories and researching the location. I pick a city, I bring up a map, I look up what are hotspots in the city. My most recent game I set in Chicago, I lived there because I didn't want to have to do all that research, but I still went, okay, what are 2 or 3 hotspots in my world? Like, I picked one chantry that kind of has an open door policy, not to the whole chantry, but they let in people, and there's kind of a common mage social area they maintain, because I thought that would create some interesting opportunities for networking and going somewhere and figuring things out. But like, you don't go beyond the bar, and then I'll generally figure out between 5 and 8 NPCs. I'll have a couple people I intend to be villains. They don't always stay that way. I've had players adopt my villains. It's very weird. And I'll have a couple like clear potential allies. And then especially with Mage, I like to have a lot of gray agents where they could be good, they could be bad. How do the players' morals really end up forming up after session 3 or 4? Because I found my Mage players never believe quite what they think their players are going to believe once they get into the game. That tends to change midway. So once I have some locations and I have some NPCs, and I'll always have to add to that NPC list, they'll like, I'm going to go here and find this type of person. And I'm just like, cool, I'm just going to hit the random name generator on my phone underneath the table. We're going to make this person up, and then I'll write a backstory before the next session. Once I have kind of those set pieces, then I will usually plan about 20% of the average session. If it's the first session, it's more like all of it. I'll plan everything for the first session because players usually aren't quite as inclined to run and make their own story at the beginning. They're just getting a sense of each other. And I never know if I've planned the right amount. Sometimes I think I've planned about a session, and it takes 3 game sessions to get through what I planned. Sometimes I think I planned the session, and halfway through I'm out of story. And it just depends on what the players end up doing with it. But I'll always plan an introduction for the players for session 1, and then an introduction to the problem. What is the problem? And that obviously varies from game to game. Sometimes it's a conflict, sometimes it's a quest giver, although with World of Darkness, I try to avoid quest givers if I can, really clear quest givers where you can see the exclamation point hanging over their head. I'm not a fan of. And so I'll try to get through that and get through. We've introduced something that your characters should feel like they need to fix. Players don't always
Yeah.
decide they feel like it needs to be fixed, and then I'll adapt. And then once we're through whatever that initial scenario is, I usually only plan about 20% of each session. I'll plan the intro, what am I going to use to like drive the players forward and get them to do some more plot? Because especially with Mage, I find the players are going to run off and do really strange, interesting things with their spheres. And I know who's playing behind the scenes mostly because I've sketched them out. And I mostly improv the majority of my games. Now, I say most sessions, there will always be those sessions that are about an encounter where I'm like, okay, we haven't had combat in 4 sessions. It feels like we're building up to something. We're going to do an encounter here. Those are planned very differently, but we're going to kind of get to challenges and how you balance them later in the outline. So I'll just say most games I plan 20% and then let the players run with it and improv. Yeah, what's your approach?
The things I try and put on the top of the piece of paper as I figure out my first session is it's only partly my story. I want the players to be adding other characters and proposing world events. If we were to look at this in stance theory, I don't like the idea that the storyteller is responsible for the world and the NPCs and the players are just responsible for the PCs. No. If you are at my table and I say, who is the person that could arrive on the scene right now that would represent a complication to you? I need you to be able to fill in that blank. Who is the person that could walk in on this happening where suddenly you have a lot of explaining to do? I don't have encyclopedic knowledge of the interior of the characters. I mean, nor does the player, but when they make it up, it tends to be more legitimate. Tend to use writer stance if we want to talk about stance theory. I always want there to be 2 interesting options for any decision point. When it's something like a quest giver, I need to have there be consequences to the character saying no that isn't just a gun to their head or something like that, where it's like, okay, this is going to be the fallout of this and this is how it's going to affect your world. So one of the problems I have with quest givers is when the quest giver says, go over here, kind of want the quest giver to point the arrow back at the location of the game. Players get to change their mind on what kind of game they want. So there will be the stated preference and then there will be the revealed preference. And sometimes you find out that you just don't have the same vocabulary, that when someone's like, oh yeah, this is dark, what they actually mean is they want to be able to kill without there being consequences, which I mean is a type of farcical kind of darkness. But yeah, the true enemy of any game to me is one of 2 things: logistics or premise rejection. And premise rejection is the phenomenon whereby a character says, well, my character wouldn't engage with this. And you're like, well, this is what we all said the session tonight was going to be. Well, my character, okay. And to which we need to come up with a reason why the character is going to participate. Or, okay, tonight you get to play a consort. Who of you has an ally that would engage with dealing with Gillamothika the Ever-Dying? So we can run the damn game. And your character is doing research or attending to their, or sharpening their weapons or meditating or in the lab or whatever. And finally, like, I get to have an off night every once in a while. I think there is a lot of stress for people to be quote unquote on. For me, for session prep, I am much less of an improviser than people think I am. I am an improviser in the same way that somebody painting something that doesn't have access to erasing is improvising. I'm improvising in the same way that Bob Ross quote unquote improvised. I want to have palettes. I am very visually oriented. I always have a Pinterest board for every one of my games and a OneNote notebook and now Midjourney prompts that I can drop them into chat or turn around my screen. And I find that a couple good keystone images of this is what our supernatural city looks like. This is the skyline. This is what it looks like as the sun goes down. This is what it looks like at dawn. Convey more about the theme and mood than any amount of writing I could do. I generally want to come armed with characters and locations tied to my plot ideas, the events I want to have happen in the world, characters and locations tied to the player characters, and a few characters and locations that I just think are cool. And the idea is if you have a bunch of these, you can kind of weave them together and a game falls out the other end. From there, my question is generally where I want the action to start. And one of the things I have done to spectacular success is in media res. The start of the first session, the characters are already in the middle of something. It requires a group that can roll with things, and to me, this is the most fun when it can happen. You are already breaking into the Pen Museum to steal the sealing cylinder of Zimri Lim. You're interrogating the underling of Martinus Ventru Turncoat. You're all standing outside the chantry, watching it burn as fire folk futilely try and put it out. The other starting option to me is the slice of life. This requires to me the most from the storyteller because it has the lowest energy level and requires the greatest push. Each character describes what they're up to on a standard day, and this hopefully interfaces with the notes that you got during session 0. One of the characters will then make a decisive action of some sort that will set a plot in motion, and the other characters will be like, yeah, we're down for that. Dunstan declares that he's tired of City Hall being controlled by a mysterious entity that he simply refers to as the Weaver. Yana wants help visiting her mentor one last time before she decides to cut off things, which requires going to the High Umbra, which she can't do. So essentially, the starting incident is something that the players declare once they've kind of got the mood and theme for what everyone else is. If no one says anything, Mage doesn't make, to me, a great slice of life anime game. So you need some sort of backup. And then to me, the last one is kind of the option drop, which is the traditional way of doing it. I modify this slightly. Victor made mention to the quest giver, the person with the exclamation mark above their head that may or may not just walk into your chantry while you're all sitting there doing, chantry stuff, because that's a thing. I frequently give players a newspaper, and for a session 1, I will give it to them between session 0 and session 1. And this is a list of interesting things that they can choose to encounter in the first session. They need to tell me ahead of time. I am perfectly comfortable telling my players I am only going to build road in the directions that you decide to drive. And you need to give me enough time that the asphalt has cooled before you drive over it, or it's still going to be sticky. Mallory, the sorcerer who visits one of your characters' therapy practice, is talking about rising clouds in the Neverwhere, which is their term for the periphery. What the dink is that? A housing complex clearly shaped like an alchemical the alchemical symbol for putrefaction has been improved, and construction is happening very quickly. The sun seems a little bit green today. Every time the radio dial passes 100, you can feel it in your teeth, marking the near return of the static walker. And the characters can say, I don't know what that is, but that sounds cool. And now I know what the first session can be. Quest givers tend to be one of two types, a low tension one, which is a take it or leave it. And then there's usually some time to describe it. So this interfaces well with that slice of life option. The Cheesesteak Symposium, which is a shadow group of disaffected technocrats, contacts you with a score where they need plausible deniability. You've done them favors before from time to time, and you know it pays real well. Your oracular time-tied character realizes you're 4 months out from the 300th anniversary of the slaying of Janax, who is probably going to start some shit on the 300th anniversary of their own death. The alternative is, I believe, another type of quest giver, but is much more high tension. The characters are interrupted. Ofres and Tansi see someone light a garbage can on fire and attempt to throw it through the front window of the chicken place that is the front of your chantry. That kind of just gets things going. A strong ally sends you coordinates over text and just the word help. An Amber Alert goes out for one of your character's children. I like having 3 references in front of me as this unfolds: everyone's character sheet, my OneNote notebook containing everything else, and my Pinterest board for visual inspiration. Nothing makes it seem like I have my stuff together so much as a character making a reference to someone and me having a picture for them. I did not know that was their picture until they said it, but in that moment, I have never looked more prepared in my life. And that's kind of my session 1. Victor, what do you try and leave your session 1 with?
My session 1, it varies a little bit depending on whether or not I'm running a Mystics game or a Technocracy game.
Okay.
So I've run one Technocracy game. I want to run another one. It was a lot of fun, but it's a lot easier to motivate your players. Like, you're getting orders, deal with it. And if you don't want to get orders, why are you a member of the union?
Premise rejection. It kind of gets rid of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. But I always leave room to reject orders, not like out and out reject them, but to subvert them in curious and interesting ways. Like, I don't have players who are playing perfect, just out of room 101, no free thought. It's you're not supposed to have free thought, but you do. And what are you going to do with that? Because I want union, but playable. So there will be some mission if it's a technocracy game. But that mission is always a little bit of a red herring. It's the monster of the week. You've got to go put down XYZ thing, where they will run into the thing they have an opinion of. So that's the more direct approach. With a Mystic game, I kind of have to thread that needle a little bit more carefully. So I tend to try to introduce something that will offend one of the players' sensibilities. So, like as an example, I ran a Sorcerer's Crusade game several years ago, and I had two Akashayana who were traveling along the Silk Road, and the game was being set in Venice, and they were coming with a Bettini who was a merchant and was bringing over silks, very, very fine enchanted silks, and selling them. And the opening game was him making that sale to someone who turned out to be in the Order of Reason. And nobody was local. Nobody knew that. And he was very affable and friendly. And I was playing up the Order of Reason and the traditions talked more than anyone admitted they did back then. That kind of got seeded in the original Order of Reason book. And they got invited to come and, you know, do a dinner and demonstrate some of their martial prowess. I put just like the tiniest edge of inappropriateness into him because Order of Reason and uncomfortable. And then at the end of the dinner, they discover that he's taken these impossible 3-dimensional photographs with like, I did the whole thing with like the pinhole camera, but a whole circle of pinhole cameras around the entire room that they'd miraculously captured a moving image through because, you know, what would be so impossible it would be magical in the, you know, Renaissance. And then they ended up using those mystic silks and some other experimental things they were doing and those photos to build automatons. Like I did a sort of proto hit mark kind of thing that emerged over the coming games. And so it was the reveal that your enlightened mystical movements have been captured by this enemy, this member of the Order of Reason. How are you going to feel about that? And so just putting these things down that I know at least some of the players are going to take offense to give them something that they want to do in the world. So I try to, instead of giving a quest, drop something that they're going to have opinions on. And ideally, I don't have to do this that often. Ideally, I do a couple of these, I unfurl something, and then they end up making their own decisions. Like when I mentioned, I've had players adopt my villains. I had a high guild member in that game that I did not intend anybody to like. He was the funder for this project, and he hated that there was cooperation with the traditions. And for some reason, my players just thought he was great, and they adopted him. And I don't know why. And so I had to pivot, make a Gabrielite into the real villain. The Gabrielite was always the real villain. I mean, but, you know, it turned into, oh, you have this relationship with this character. Well, okay. What would be narratively meaning now that this has been established in a book? If I were going to the next chapter, what would I want to be there? And so I try to just drop stimuli for my players to react to, but not dictate, you have to do this thing. I occasionally get trapped into, you should do this thing. It's the logical motion. It's the logical action. And every time I do that, it doesn't work that well. So I'm trying more and more to get away from that. The more goals are set by the players, the better the game runs. And then obviously a lot of times it will be me reacting to their stimuli. They'll bring up a thing they want once we're into it. You know, you brought up not having to make up all of the characters. Later in that same Sorcerer's Crusade game, the Hermetic player was like, I have a terrible relationship with my father. And I was like, cool, you have a terrible relationship with your father. Guess who's the main villain for the next story arc?
Turns out, yeah.
You know, and it was great. And he got an epic kill. The patricide was very real.
The patricide was very real. Whenever we get to say that statement, it has been earned, and that's good.
And he loved it. I mean, so I'm very much stimulus and wait and see response in my approach to keeping a game moving. It doesn't always work, but I find it works most of the time. It also makes it easy for me to adapt to my players. It's like, here's a stimulus. Oh, you didn't react to that. Okay, why didn't you react to that? Let's make the next stimulus a little different. And I occasionally have to throw a whole story out. I've had 1 or 2 stories where I'm like, let's go for a different tone. We've done 2 or 3 stories like this. Let's do something different. And it was clear after 3 weeks, just like 3 sessions, it was not working. And I went, cool, I'm going to find an exit. We're going to do something else that syncs with the party better. And a lot of it is being aware of those beats and then asking your players to check in on how you're doing and if things are syncing with them. The rough thing, and this happened with the one story I had to throw in, that Sorcerer's Crusade game, one player loved it, but only one player. And that's always kind of rough.
Yeah, the big thing for me is my games are slightly stylized in that I am very comfortable using the jargon and lexicon of like storytelling and screenwriting with the players. So I will say at the end of the session, what do we think the open threads are? And we will write them all down. And we'll be like, well, Mitzi brought up the fact that she hadn't heard back from her mentor in a couple of months. Okay, that's an open thread. There was that weird explosion that we overheard. Okay. There was the person who I think may have gotten cell phone video of Charles going loud, of being vulgar. There was that weird news broadcast that seemingly only we noticed. There's the continuing problem of people talking about vagrants disappearing or something like that. Write them all down. Okay, which one do you think we want to go after next time? And you'll say, and two people will raise their hand and go like, hey, I really want to chase down the cell phone guy. And another two people are like, I think we really need to focus on why people are disappearing. Okay, cool. I now know what to plan for next time. And this to me gives, once there's a little bit of pre-commitment, I feel like players are slightly less likely to go murder hobo, in the same way that if you're inviting people over for dinner and you're like, so what should I make? And you're like, oh, we'd love to have a pot roast. It's been ages since we've had a good pot roast. If you get there and you don't want pot roast, you're going to shut your darn mouth because you asked for pot roast. And I find that very much applies to mage sessions. Again, this may be because I'm dealing with theater people and people from STEM backgrounds, and that's about it. And one group is like, the show must go on. And the other one's like, well, it's in our waterfall chart. This needs to happen. As the game goes on, I have a document I share with everyone in the group called the Guiding Hand. It's a term I took from Invisible Sun, Take a Drink. And it includes 3 things, just a log of what happened in each session that every character would know about. That is to make up for the fact that if this were happening in real time, everyone would remember things gooder, but we're meeting once a month or something like that. So the characters that have been introduced and the locations of note. And the end of each of those includes kind of the plot threads and what the group has opted for next time, so I know what direction to build road in. I also try and have it so characters have 1 or 2 kind of side stories that they can explore at their leisure. I feel one of the considerations is a lot of people have games where you're either in quest mode or downtime, and either the whole group's together and we're dealing with the Temple of Elemental Evil, or we're someone's dealing with their holy orders, another person is researching something, somebody is assassinating someone for money. I don't know about you, but for like a lot of times in real life, these all kind of get mixed together. Like, I like the games where you both have to deal with the hobgoblins of Vormos, Grand Harvester of Souls, but you also have a dance recital that you need to go to this weekend, and you still have your mortal community to take care of. So I tend to just have plots where the action is there and you can just kind of dip in and out of it. And that's just kind of the stories I tend to run. How do you prepare for a arbitrary session once the story is up and running?
So I will generally spend some time thinking about what happened last session. What are the players currently revved up about? And how much more stimulus do they need to keep moving? Because sometimes we end the session and it's like, wow, okay, there's a problem and we need to deal with it. And there are like 3 ideas that get thrown out at the end. And I'll generally at that point do kind of what you described, where I'm like, which of these would you like to pursue so I can plan for it? So sometimes the last session ends and I've got a blueprint and I get the players to sign off on the blueprint and I plan that and it's great. Sometimes, but not often. Those are not most sessions. So a lot of times I'll sort of start a session and think, well, what are the stimuli that I want to drop? And I'll also think about what are the tidbits of the mystery I want to give away, because a lot of times I'm spinning a mystery, especially if I am running a long form game and I have, a long endpoint that we're going to get to. I always leave room for players to meander their way to that endpoint. But if I have something they're trying to figure out, I need to make sure that I'm consistently revealing stuff. And so I'll think about, well, what are the plot beats I know I want to reveal? I won't plan how they're going to be revealed. Because again, this is Mage. It maybe somebody's going to jump into an NPC's mind palace. Maybe someone is going to, interrogate an NPC instead of killing them. I say that like that's ever happened. That's never happened. I keep hoping. Maybe someone's going to go investigate and read the every fifth book in the library for 5 hours and somehow derive what's going on because their entropic paradigm is very strange. For me, knowing that I'm always encouraging my players to investigate with their spheres whenever I can, whatever mechanism they use to investigate, I will have a few tidbits where I'm like, I know I want to drop this. How can I make this work in the paradigm they're investigating and make it feel like they thought, this is the cool thing they did and they, figured out the mystery. They found the right place to look. Because truth be told, in role-playing games, 90% of the time, you didn't find the right place to look. If the storyteller pre-picked a place you had to look to find a secret, that secret will never be found. The storyteller found a good narrative moment to give you a plot kernel. And so I always kind of know the kernels I want to give out. I know at least what the motivations for a few NPCs are that I'm going to use as stimulus in the game I'm running right now. One of my players in game 1 just decided that he was going to go up and antagonize the low-level NWO agents I started with. I wanted to start with what are your peers in the Union? Much smaller group. I was not looking for big, scary, terrible Union. So I started with not exactly Mulder and Scully. They look like Mulder and Scully archetypically, but they have different personalities. But that kind of level of NWO agent where they're not totally in on the joke themselves, even though they have a little bit of verite. And I thought, they're going to see FBI agents. And these are a bunch of street level, some of them deal drugs. We're not really always all on the up and up sort of characters anyway. So even not being advanced enough to know the Technocratic Union exists, nobody's going to go up and just kick the FBI car. One of my players decided to just antagonize the FBI agents in their neighborhood for no good reason. The look of horror on everyone else's face was truly amazing. But now I have, he's antagonized them. They're now authorized to directly engage with the deviant. What does that mean? And the next game is going to be about the repercussions of his actions. But again, framing it as you're being pushed to deal with things, but what you do with that push, I will then use to spin off other stories. So I was trying to plan enough road to get to the horizon, but as it turns out, that's not that much road. So by the time they get to the horizon, I know if I need to fork or they're going to fork or they've gone off the road. So I have to have them find another one. I'm always kind of playing that game a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I forget that I think V5 actually does a good job of is reminding us that we can zoom in and zoom out in terms of the granularity of the play. The most granular play, arguably, is traditional combat, where we're literally taking the world in 6-second increments or whatever. You zoom out a level, and that's most of our person versus person or person in scene roles. You zoom out further, and people just generally describe what they're doing, and maybe it gets abstracted to a single role. You zoom out further, and then you have a montage. And then you can zoom out yet further and say, okay, so what have your characters been up to in the last 3 months? I think we do ourselves a disservice when we decide that each game session and each moment in each game has to treat time in the same way. So it is frequently the case that you will kind of zoom in and zoom out. After that climax, to me, you kind of want a little bit of in-game discussion as the characters get their immediate impressions. Then you zoom out a little bit further. How is everyone dealing with this? Then you zoom out further or zoom back in, either one, to say, okay, maybe you haven't unpacked all of this, or alternatively, this is how we've moved on. So to me, session planning is frequently a question of energy, in the sense that you can metagame, in the sense that chances are you're playing with friends of yours. You probably have some information about the day they're having, and you get the text that says, oh wow, work has been an absolute bear. Can't wait to play tonight. Or the opposite, where it is very clear that someone's like, hey, I'm ready for this story to move on to its next chapter. Generally, I want to ask the question, are we in a mode where we are introducing new plot ideas and new characters, or resolving them? Is there a way, if we are in a resolving thing, is there a way for me to tie multiple threads up at the same time? If you have several characters with several character arcs, coincidence is your friend. Oh, turns out the mentor that you are looking for your fourth dot of forces also may have a lead on where you can find solarium gas to refuel your etheric vehicle or something like that. I try not to do 2 sessions of the same type in a row if I can do that, and that also allows me to pass around the spotlight a little bit more. What type of emotional beats have we not recently hit that seem like they would be on the horizon? Has anyone not gotten the spotlight? And what is my energy level? When I'm preparing that session, I generally have index cards with the motifs or themes of the game on them, preferably in my vision so I can remember to introduce them. I love visual motifs. Even if it's something the characters don't notice, I think the players, it is assigned to them that the storyteller is thinking about the game and treating it as an integrated whole. And I also want some way of tracking what threads have been integrated into the plot and which ones haven't. I think everyone should have an action or advancement for one of their personal goals every session or 2. I try and have an idea of what do I think happened in the background. It has enough time elapsed that the world has changed around the characters. Someone goes into a number room and steps out, and it's 2 months later. How has the city evolved? It doesn't need to be a formal system, but to me, as a storyteller, it is important to not give the impression that the NPCs were waiting in the room for the characters to walk in on them. It is important that the city feel alive. And then there are a few logistical questions for the session. Based on the options the characters chose, will this require a map? Does it need to just be a conceptual map, or do I need to have a floor plan? God bless Drive-Thru RPG and the fact that just about any contemporary building, you can get a 1 foot equals 1 inch map of it for 99 cents, or $1.95 if it's a big one. What are the key locations? What are 2 odd descriptors that I can add to it to verify that it is part of the world of darkness? Who are the key people? Do I have a clear image of who they are in my head? Part of this is visual, part of this is personality. Generally, I will do a physical description, 3 personality adjectives, and a quirk of some sort. And that is generally the direction I go for a continuing thing. And my process as a storyteller is to make sure that I am adding information to the game as it evolves. I'm updating my notes on who the characters are, that I always have new people or threads to introduce if that is the phase of the game we're in. Because sometimes you're doing an 8-session arc and it's session 7. You shouldn't be introducing too many new characters at this point. And I feel perfectly comfortable saying, hey, we're winding things down. And that is a sign to the players, maybe I shouldn't be heading off in a new direction if we haven't kind of agreed to that. Do you have any special prep that you do for certain session types, like if combat's going to be involved or if they're facing the big bad?
Yeah, I absolutely do. So really, I have 2 types of combat. I have improv combat, which is, oh no, we pissed off the cops, and for that, I tend to use advice that I think I first saw in V5. It's certainly not unique to V5, that when you're dealing with especially unnamed NPCs, don't worry about full stat sheets. Worry about a few things they can do that'll be a bit iconic. Maybe it's a discipline, maybe it's, a certain sphere combination, and then come up with like a social difficulty level. Are they good at social? Are they good at physical combat? Are they really good at dodging? And have just a few numbers for dice pools you're going to go back to. Because really, for most NPCs, a fully detailed stat sheet doesn't actually help. It does not improve the game experience for anybody involved. So I have a kind of a couple raw archetypes in my head, really, for we pissed off the cops, we angered that security guard, we got into a fight in a bar, those sorts of things. I can improv that stuff. And generally the sessions where that stuff happens, combat takes up like a quarter of the session because it happened unexpectedly. Then this is a major story situation. And especially for mage, I tend to run big games. So I don't think I've run mage with less than 5 mages ever, which is a challenge, especially if you let them get to 5 arete, which I've done before. Yeah, I know. Terry's shaking his head, and he's not wrong. So, in that kind of situation, I try not to do the D&D thing of here are their powers, here's what they do, because when I do that, my players will steamroll me. I had like a big Fomori villain in my last campaign, and I thought they were super intimidating. And my players steamrolled what I had planned out in a round. And I went, cool, their body explodes and 7 new horrible things appear because I'm not ending this combat here. And it wouldn't have been satisfying for them either. So I have a theme. I have an idea. I have some classifications of powers. And when I'm dealing with mage NPCs, I always plan paradigm. So their abilities and attributes might be some common pools that they roll, but I always know what spheres they have. And I always know what their Erte is, and I always know what their paradigm and instruments are. I might not go all the way down to the like 7 specific instruments and like have written out their specific philosophical view, but the practical parts of paradigm. What are the movements I do? What is the crazy lens that I raise above my head to channel the light of the stars down into the physical manifestation of this hologram that's going to become solid and attack you? You know, I always work that stuff out for any of the mages that could show up and need to do magic. For some of them, it's really easy. If I've got a couple 2 Arete NWO agents, I've got some gadgets, they're not going to do anything, you know, all that weird or hard to describe. But like when I was doing Sorcerer's Crusade, I had a Master Celestial Master. That's circular, but I had a 5 Arete Celestial Master, and I had to work out some paradigm for her to make what she did really fit and feel aesthetic and feel like it could be in this time period. And so that's the stuff I really worry about working out. I do tend to improv magic beats for mage players, unless it's we're about to fight the big bad. And then I'll sort of plan out, here's some ads I want them to summon. They're going to be angelic in nature, so you're going to need to figure out that you have to fold some spirit into your attacks or it's not going to damage them. I'll put some things like that, and I'll have some of those you need to do this thing, because if I don't put some of those roadblocks and if I don't force some level 1 sphere evaluation rolls, then combat ends too quickly with mages. So I'll map all of that stuff out and kind of have in my head, what's their first round going to be like? Anything past the first round, it's really what have my players thought up, because I allow pretty wild magic. Like, unless you're playing a super strict contemporary union game, in which case, okay, I'm going to make you play like a technocrat. No, you can't spin wild magic. You're going to have some rotes. But even then, I let my players take as many rotes as they can think up. It's fine. They don't cost XP. So you can end up with some pretty dynamic mages, even if they have limited spheres. So I have to think on my feet. Every time I've like designed an encounter to the 9s, it's over and around with mage. Mage specifically. I can do that with vampire. I can even do that with Changeling sometimes. Changeling shares a little bit of the unpredictableness that Mage has, but not as badly. I'm planning big beats, and I'm expecting to have to go beyond what I planned, even for big encounters.
Yeah, for NPCs for me, I do the, what are they great at? What's their average dice pool? And what are they bad at? Their desperation pool, as it were. And that's kind of what I write down. When it comes down to figuring out their spheres, I generally figure out what is their cool looking marquee blockbuster effect. And that will tell me what it is. So for instance, I had a Incan character that had the ability to summon and empower a army of tiny dolls by a spirit magic. So it's like, okay, well, you're going to need matter 3 to coalesce that. You need prime 2 to power it. Some of them breathe fire, so we got some forces 3 going on there. We got spirit 4 to just kind of deal with opening that much of the gauntlet. So suddenly I know a bunch about their spheres, and I kind of want it to work. So they probably have an Arete of 5 just to have enough dice to make it work, or something else that does it. And generally that characterization will explain it. The other thing I do is, what is the quirk about their paradigm? What is the odd glitch about it? So you have a chorister who talks about Saint Krishna or something like that, and you're like, well, that's a choice. Or the Hermetic who talks about the angel Doctavius or something like that. You're like, that is a remarkably contemporary name. I'm curious. The Pastel Goth Hollower, what is that twist? The other things I want is, when I write down the NPC, what secondary role do they take? This character is a meditation on wealth. This character is a consideration of hubris. This character is, what would a truly doctrinaire verbena look like or something like that. And I usually have that kind of secondary thing, because if you can deliver plot and develop the world at the same time, that's going to kind of be a good thing. For me, planning combat is generally me saying, this is combat. The dealing health damage is not going to be the primary focus. The question is how much collateral damage occurs. So you're having the fight in the warehouse. How much do the characters want to just crush the hit mark, and how much do they want to deal with the fact that they don't want this warehouse complex to go up in flames? Do they want to protect the security guards? Are they concerned about the cache of documents that could be destroyed in the course of the fight? You want to leave, but somebody is going to need to figure out how to get through the door and have that person not die in the process. So to me, combat as puzzle tends to be the direction I go. In a lot of cases, the wheels fall off of combat, especially if you have a bunch of mages on one person, just kind of the way soak works, since it is a rolled pool as opposed to reduces damage. And the fact that mages are so kind of squishy, to me, combat is a way of doing problem solving under duress. And kind of your health bar is the tracker of how poorly that is going. Like, health is another pool. It's another gas tank. So with that in the bag, Victor, how about we take some listener questions?
That sounds great.
Okay. The first one was, how do you track relationships, whether they be with NPCs or organizations?
So I take a relatively informal approach to that. Whenever a relationship with an NPC develops, I will keep drafting out that NPC in kind of my working document. And I always have a working document with running notes. I generally start a new document for each story arc, and I'll pull forward characters that are going to persist, or if we're moving and changing settings, I might start fresh. And so I will always have kind of a list of the key characters, the NPCs, and how they care about each other. And then as the players sort of change those assumptions by getting into relationships with NPCs, maybe they don't react to what I wrote up the way I expected. And they're like, no, I love this character that you meant as a villain. I'm like, okay, I'm going to rewrite them. Like, this is resonating differently. This clearly needs to be different. I will change backstory if it's appropriate, and it'll make a better experience. So a lot of it's sort of almost like rough draft story writing kind of thing. I don't really have a visual breakdown of that. I run scenes a lot in my head while I walk my dog. So I'll sort of be like, okay, this relationship is developing. How do I think this is going to play out in my head? How does this player normally react to things? And I'll sort of think through what that character would say or respond. And then at the end of the walk, I'll kind of sit down and jot down what worked, what made sense into the document. So it's prepped for the next game session. And then in terms of the character relationships with each other, I don't really have a formal way of tracking that. I let the players sort of keep track of how they feel about each other. And I'm constantly looking for opportunities to kind of play on what's just happened in the next game or two. Like, oh, these two players are both sparked by this thing that I put down as a stimuli. So I want the next couple stimuli to continue down that path that's resonating. The other thing that I'll definitely do is kind of highlight who hasn't had a moment in the sun for a while. And generally, I will kind of keep track of which players are going to grab their own moments in the sun and which players do I need to give them to. Because I'll generally have those players who are like, I'm going to go out and do a thing. Great, cool. I'll let you do a thing until you've done that for 3 games in a row. And then I'm going to take the introvert over here and I'm going to make the story about them because that needs to happen. So I'm always kind of thinking like, what's happening naturally and where do I need to stick my thumb on the scales to make everything balanced? So a lot of my relationship tracking is about managing that dynamic.
For me, I found that the things I want to track will appear in the game in a couple of ways. I try and track banal relationships, which is to say, who could have a crush on one of the characters? What NPC has a weird fascination? The more an NPC looks like they're becoming one note, and it is not because they are a background, the more I will try and find a hook that will get them to be viewed in a new light or a new way. Your fixer, who normally gets you the components you need for your alchemical mixture, says, sorry, can't do it tonight. This is my night with the kids. Oh, that's a thing I didn't know. And some people like that kind of humanization. And now the characters are like, well, we're really in a bind if we're going to put Mulhectorus back to bed. We really need to interrupt, ironically, bedtime. so so that just got a little bit more interesting. To me, the guiding hand, the key document, will keep track of groups and organizations, a thumbnail of who they are and how they view the characters. If it is strong enough that it can be called on for a system benefit in the game, it goes on a character sheet somewhere as a background, whether it be a contact, an ally, a spy, something like that. I like having that thing to point to because it is frequently the case that characters are like, I don't know what to do. Look at the character sheet. It hasn't changed in the past 30 seconds, but still the reflex to just look at the character sheet is there. And I think it is important to add it there. I haven't gotten to the point where I'll have like a communal character sheet where it's like, what are the resources that the Chantry can bring to bear? Maybe one day I will, but if I can keep everything on people's character sheets or in that guiding hand, I consider that to be a victory. How do you plan for jumps in power, which is to say when someone gains a third dot of a sphere for the first time or a new point of arete?
Jumps in power are challenging. I have done a lot of jumps in power because I've run 2 mage games now that went for over 3 years. Those games get real crazy. It's hard to plan ahead for that stuff because, for example, I just got 3rd level life. Good for me. And it's really easy to go, oh, they're going to start doing more damage. They're going to maybe build, life forms. They're going to start playing around with manipulating bacteria and using it to spread disease. And those are all kind of examples. And that Sorcerer's Crusade game that I ran, I had the last player who had not gotten to 5 arete. Everyone else had gotten to 5 arete. And he went, I could get to 5 arete, but there's this system. And how do you do that? Where you make sphere rolls and then buy attributes at half cost. Can I do that? And I looked at the system and I went, I would never have written this. But if you really don't want to be a master, sure.
Get in there, Life 3. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. And it was not a thing I had been planning for at all. But man, he stacked everything. I've never seen anyone spend so much experience up sheet before, but it's because he was getting things half off.
Yeah.
He also rolled 4 ones on his 4 arete for one of the dice, like one of the extended rituals to like max his charisma. That had some very interesting things going on that he was never able to get rid of. He did not mind that they made the Cabal's life miserable because he thought it was cool. The other players did not. Oh man, he was charismatic in all of the worst ways. Like, yeah, if it's 5 dots on the sheet, but ... It was one of those things. A lot of my planning for power jumps is a little bit post facto with Mage specifically, because it's like, okay, you bought this thing, but really, what are you going to do with it? Because I don't know what powers you bought. I can maybe guess based on your paradigm, but usually I find if someone gets a big new sphere, especially when they get like 4th or 5th level of the sphere, there are 100 things you could do with that sphere, but there are like 3 or 4 things that they're going to do with their paradigm and their perspective. And just knowing that they got 5th level prime doesn't really tell me what those things are. And that's risky because that means I'm planning sessions without knowing what's coming. But hey, that's Mage. So a little bit, I'm very quickly adapting and being like, okay, they steamrolled this. So my next encounter now needs to account for the fact that they're going to be doing this. That does mean I'm always a little bit behind, but most of the time it's only a little bit, because especially when you get into the sphere purchases that change game dynamics, they're not happening every game, unless you're giving out 15, 20 experience a session, which I'm generous. If I'm going to let the game scale up that high, I am generous so people feel like they're progressing. I'm not that generous though. So as long as like a big power level shift happened, I'm going to have at least 5 or 6 sessions before another big power shift happens. And I enforce that by telling players you have to buy up sheet before you can buy down sheet again.
So what do you mean by, can you explain up sheet, down sheet, please?
Up sheet, down sheet. So down sheet is disciplines, arete, spheres, whatever. And I do that for all the World of Darkness games because there are players who are like, I'm just going to buy my powers with all of my XP until the end of time. And I do not let people do that. When it's like, oh, you bought 2 spheres? Your last 2 purchases were spheres? you're spending your next 15 experience on attributes and abilities. Deal with it. And that's kind of how I control power creep. And that's backed up, especially in Mage, when they talk about what it means to get to Adept, what it means to be a master. It's not just about having spheres and arete. So that balances things, and that really prevents things from progressing faster than I can adapt to them. So a lot of times it's not even planning to counteract whatever the cool power is. Sometimes I have to do that. I have to, upscale everything so things still feel like a challenge. Sometimes it's just, oh, I need to put a challenge in place that is the tool to beat, because you just spent 50 experience on that, because, level times 8, and, well, maybe not 50, but you just spent 40 experience on that 5th level sphere, and 40 experience before that getting your 5th level of arete. I'm going to give you something to do with that thing. So a lot of times it's looking at those powers and making sure I'm creating scenarios where they're useful.
Yeah, it is that mix of, I have always had a fraught relationship with, you're going to get matter 4, I'm going to come up with a challenge that can be addressed with matter 4. Player doesn't always know what the sphere can do, so frequently before you get that next dot, to me the game of Mage fundamentally shifts between the 3rd and the 4th dot. The 2nd dot, you can be clever. The 3rd dot gives you a lot of wacky hijinks. The 4th, you are almost a force of nature. Like with Mind 4, the fact that you can just rummage around in someone's subconscious is ridiculous. Matter 4, just rearranging kind of the physical world to your liking, causing earthquakes, creating rips in space-time, hanging effects is kind of nuts the first time you get to do that. So to me, that 4th dot is really where I have to be like, oh, the game has changed. You are either now some of the most potent weak mages or some of the weakest potent mages out there. It's just kind of a rough way that I think about it. I tend to build stories where there are the challenges that a character is facing may or may not be tied to their abilities, which is to say, I don't have a lot of encounters that can be steamrolled in a certain way. Like, you can short circuit it, like you get a pass on this first part of this 3-part series, but I generally don't have big set pieces in a lot of cases, unless it's going to be one of those things where things really go sideways, or a story will have maybe 2 of those. It will frequently allow a character to collapse what is happening as a story. We get there quickly, and now any of the complications, you are now using your spheres to say this story is no longer about this. Correspondence 4 means the game is no longer about logistics, and so on. Life 4, the game is no longer about worrying about non-aggravated damage. So that to me is generally how I view things. And also the characters, if I've done my job well, will have a new arc that comes out of that. The problem is when you have a mismatch, when you have your master who is like, I finally want to have my own condo. And you're like, what does that even mean? You've had matter 2 for ages. You can just make gold. You're child of knowledge. That's like your deal. Why are you? So that the thing I need to do is make sure that players know what an appropriate challenge could be. The other key thing is it does take players a little bit to figure out how to use a thing. So it's one of those things. It's like, oh, you've got your 4th dot. I'm like, yeah, but you don't have system mastery. You've never rummaged around inside someone's mental space before. The first one's going to be a little bit messy. I try and include that and make it a set piece, and preferably something everyone can join in with. The first time you rummage around in someone's subconscious, everyone else gets to be there too, either as other characters or because contrivance allowed them to exist there. So to me, I also try and have threats that just kind of grow organically. Like, haha, I now have the trivial tools to take out this kindred, but you don't have trivial resources to take out their sire necessarily. Yes, you can now deal with a corrupt police officer. Can you deal with a corrupt police department? That is a fundamentally different thing. And some people like when their challenges scale, or they want to see change. Hey, mortal things are trivial for me. I do want to go after Vormas, Grand Harvester of Souls. How do you handle character creation for people who are new to Mage?
For people who are new to Mage, like I said, if they come in at the beginning of the campaign, we'll all be making characters together at session 0. That's a really easy setting to just say, okay, most of the players are going to be able to do most of this themselves. They might jump in and ask me some thematic things, but I'm going to spend some time with you because you've never built a character before, and we'll just walk through it. When it's someone who's coming in partway through a Chronicle, like that Sorcerer's Crusade game, I had someone come in. One of my players said, hey, I just met this new guy and I'd really like to invite him to the game. And I'm like, okay, cool. What's his experience level? He's never role played before. And everyone was already like an established adept in the Sorcerer's Crusade setting. And I'm like, if you want to do that, I'm fine with it. But do you want to keep this guy? It worked out, but that was a little bit of a different situation. We met one-on-one. I did a lot more hand-holding because I was giving him enough experience to make a fully adept mage, and it was his first role-playing character in the Renaissance setting. We spent a lot of time talking about what does paradigm mean? How are you going to do your magic? So it depends on experience level and the difficulty level of the game. Like I would consider that like varsity jumping in the deep end at the beginning, whereas kind of a softer version of this with some of the convention games that I've run. I did one technocracy game and the characters were pre-made, but a character is never 100% pre-made in Mage because how do I do my magic is a thing that you still have to figure out. And so I had like a small group of street level technocrats, and one of them was a syndicate mage. And the person who picked up the syndicate template had never played Mage before, never played any World of Darkness game before. And she was like, what can I do? I'm very confused. And I was just like, here are 5 things you could do. And here's here's some ideas about paradigm. It's not like you absolutely have to do this. This is my vision of like how I'd improv this. She took a few of them and ran with it for the first half of the session. And by the latter half of the session, she was making up a few things on her own. I ran into her and her friends at the next Gen Con, and they, said, oh my God, you're the guy who ran that game. We loved it. We picked up Mage. We think it's great. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a different situation because the template part was done, but I really feel like it is, especially with Mage, it is the storyteller's job to kind of be the encyclopedia of how the game is run. It's a little bit true of all games, and it's not always the fairest expectation, but it is what it is, especially when it comes to improving paradigm. Like if you can successfully storytell Mage, that means you can probably successfully improv 2 or 3 paradigms in a session on the high end. Maybe not every session, but there's going to be that game where 3 completely different Mage NPCs all do a magic effect and you have to describe them. If you can do that, you can help your players. And I really think, especially with Mage, it's GM versus player is not the mode to use. Mm-hmm. So most of my focus is on paradigm and helping with that. Like the stat stuff, especially with classic World of Darkness, isn't that hard. I will always let players, even experienced players, move dots around the first 3 sessions, because there's always that moment where you're like, I thought this would make sense and it really doesn't. And I'm like, whatever, move the points. I don't care. I don't care that you didn't envision exactly how these games were going to go. I don't want you to have wasted 10% of your character creation points. That's not fun. It's a mixture of flexibility and guidance and suggestions and being open to whatever idea a player throws at me, especially a new player. If they pitch something at me and I'm like, I can only kind of see how that would work, but it's cool, I'm going to let it fly.
The biggest problem I run into is when a character wants to emulate a character from another IP. That is generally the fast route to heartbreak, where it's like, I want to be this character and I want to do this. It's like, well, the magic in this game doesn't really work that way, and paradox is a thing. If someone can stipulate a type of character they want to be, I want to be a witch or I want to be an assassin, I can run with that. I generally start with just listing the traditions and some of the crafts because I think they are strong and striking, and it's a great place to start, and I do not think it complicates the game at all to tell people about them. Their backstory and history and how they relate to one another, yes, but just to say you are an intensely pious mage, but of a belief system that is in no way mainstream, and your faith is powerful enough to shift the world. I think that's a useful thing. You use the magic of fate to balance out karmic imbalances in the world, and that may be viewed as Lady Luck or the Moirai or the Norns. Get in there. That I find very useful. I ask them if they have a archetype that they have, like a real world thing that they are the magic version of, or a historical character or something like that. And then I ask them what they want their character to be able to do-ish in kind of a vague sense. And then I try and draw a circle around that. Handling character creation, I feel like it could be an episode on its own, and it would be an hour and a half of very useful information for the one person it worked for.
Yeah.
I don't have a good universal thing. For me at this point, it's very much I talk to the player for 30 seconds, try and figure out what kind of player they are, and we run with that. If you want to be Timmy McPower Gamer, I will run with you there. The key thing I try to avoid is D&D classes. I have found that generally causes more trouble than it's worth. If someone's like, I want to be a fighter, it's like, well, we got a lot of different versions of that, and your ability to do damage is generally just going to be easier if you have a gun. It's hard to be a healer in this game. You don't have a lot. Like, so the big thing I don't do is ask for a D&D kind of character class. Yeah. And I think one year you and I should just go to a convention and run 700 mage sessions, and it should be Victor and Terry Mage Can.
Yeah. That would be fantastic. Yeah, I like the idea of asking about archetype. The other thing I do with new players, especially with Mage, more so than any other game system, is I will go into my M20 book, my PDF M20 book, and slice out just the tiniest part of the game that I think is needed to get started. And that is all I show a new player. I do not show them the tomb. If they show up in person, they're going to see it on the shelf and probably on the table for reference, but I do not ask them to read it. I'm like, okay, I'm running a Mystic game, then I'm going to pull out the Mystics. I'm just running a tradition game, I'm just going to pull out the traditions and the description of maybe what the traditions are, and maybe just like the chapter on magic, and maybe the first part of the chapter on rules. I won't pull out all the rules, but I'll pull out like basic action resolution, and I'll just print that out and say, this is all you need to worry about. Do not look at the rest of this book.
So one of the questions was, how do you handle red herrings? I don't have them. They don't exist. Anytime there is a mystery, if they put the clues together in such a way that it gives them an answer, that is the right answer. The least fun RPG on the face of the planet is guess what the storyteller is thinking.
Yup. I know. I feel exactly the same way. It's kind of a different version of what I said earlier with I've got clues that I know I want to give out. I am not going to put them somewhere specific that the player needs to think to look for, because the way I think about Mage in general is I always think about Mage from the point of view of, if I were writing a novel, what would actually be interesting? You don't have a place that your characters are going to have to look to find a thing and then like, gosh, I hope my characters look there. Your characters look there because that's what makes the story interesting. And in a game of collaborative storytelling, the person who comes up with, oh, but what if they looked there and that's where they found the thing, could be the player.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I do not have red herrings. I don't believe in red herrings. Sometimes I even give out too much information. Like, oh, well, I gave out more in this game than I originally meant to, but they just rolled so well on their entropy.
Other times I will turn something into a non-red herring, into, I don't know what color, into a green herring. It goes from a stoplight to a go light, where it's like, well, you seem fascinated by this. How can I make there something there? And sometimes I call for a snack break to figure it out. And I'll say, what do you want there to be there? And we just kind of figure it out. Again, I don't really give bonus points for the mystery of everything seeming seamless. I find it very easy to dip back and forth between this is what my character thinks, this is me as a player, and this is Terry, the person who really needs a bathroom break in the next 15 minutes. I am a slightly scatterbrained extrovert, so I feel comfortable moving between those realms. One day I hope to run a game as riotously active as the Ombligo del Diablo M5 actual play, but just if you're curious and you know what that is the direction I try and get my games to go. The next question was, how do you build suitable challenges? The only things I would like to mention there is, when I want to do a suitable challenge, there is always the logistical question of, can we get it to fit in the game if a player has a particular challenge they want in mind? And is the challenge something that can still be done if only 3 out of the 4 players are there? And that to me is the hard part when we say, if there's 5 people, we're going to run it as long as there's at least 3 in the storyteller. That to me is the hard part, to have the knobs that don't depend on someone having access to Forces 4 or Spirit 3 or something like that, and having workarounds. And to me, one of the solutions to that is to have set pieces. There's an environmental hazard that will help you deal with it. But to me, a lot of Mage is that sense of tense creative problem solving where you're like, well, this is the state of the world. This is the thing I want to get. Rarely to me is there one role that stands between victory and defeat, and is that obvious? Just like everything else in life, at least for me, I very rarely have these make or break moments in life. It's just you kind of shuffle through, and sometimes you shuffle through well, and sometimes you have a hard week. And to me, mages are not exempt from that. If you have a very heroic game where you want to build up to those, introduce momentum or some other ballast mechanic that can help you work it out. The other thing to me about a suitable challenge, and I'm kind of inverting the question, is the challenge going to be faced with the systems that the game gives? If someone has to do some computer hacking, are we going to use the hacking system, or are we going to use something else? And that is a case of player expectation. Hey, I built my character to do this thing real good. I want a set piece where I hack all IPs simultaneously, or I cause a satellite to fall from orbit. Okay, I need to know that. But other times it's like, well, you got 3 dots in computers. Okay, we're good. Like, so the question of, is that suitable? It very much to me depends on framing. And the other thing is I avoid all or nothing scenarios. Villains frequently get to make an escape. Characters, I avoid all or nothing scenarios, but frequently there will still be a cost. Characters generally get to run away. They will be injured and they will have their pride ruined and they may lose face in the eyes of their allies, but they didn't get killed by the Lord of Lies. Likewise, villains can make an escape, or they can choose a non-violent way of resolving it or something like that. I try and avoid those buildups. I deal with anxious players, as I am myself anxious and tend to attract those type of people. So it is more of a sense of relief when plot has happened than a sense of joy that victory has been done. Where like the emotion that most happens at my table is, oh, thank God. Oh, as opposed to, hooray, we freed the villagers. We are just all anxious people in that. Those are the games I play, he said, oversharing.
Yeah, I think the other really important thing with challenges is to adapt to dice. So this is a game with a botch mechanic, and the botch in Mage is super, super important. So I always want botches to feel significant. I want botches to have something interesting happen that will be fun for the players, but bad for the characters. But I've had games where it's like, you know what? This is the 7th botch tonight, and no one's having fun. You succeed.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person that never lets my characters fail, but there is a level of failure that can come out of a situation that is just sapped the fun out of the room. And I will, when we hit that threshold, I'll read the room and just be like, nope, you succeed. We're not doing this, which isn't always like, it's not like that inverts into a great success feeling, like getting a great roll, but it can move the momentum and you can get back there by the end of the session sometimes. So, but the flip side of that is I have had the one worst timed botch ever after the character makes a super critical character risk. And I go, I don't normally like character death, but you earned this one. Let's make it really cool.
Yeah.
And the player was like, I will roll a new character next game. This is going to be the best death ever. And we've made that happen. There's a trade-off in adapting as the challenge unfolds to what's actually turning out to be fun for your players.
How do you feel about the Troika system? This was introduced in Digital Web 2.0 and involves having 3 places, 3 characters, 3 conflicts, 3 locations, 3 background events, and 3 revelations that can occur in the session. That sounds like a lot of work.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like the idea of this system is don't plan your scenes because it'll never play out the way you expect. Because just as much as the players can't figure out exactly where you hid the clue, you can't figure out exactly what they're going to do in the situation, and you want flexibility. I think that's the root of this. Just like have these things ready to drop. I think that's too much for each session, and that's going to burn a storyteller out. I think having a subset of that, having a key environment where you're pretty sure things are going to happen, especially if you've gotten some clues from your characters in the last session, where to build the road, having some revelation, some things that if they go, we're going to go investigating with our level 1 spheres, have some stuff for them to find. I think that's the spirit of it. I just think this is too much.
My feeling of it is not to have for each session, but to always have those things kind of in the wings. I always want an interesting character that I can introduce with a little bit of that I can give him a fake mustache and a wig and send him in to be interesting. I do like the idea of, though, always saying, what is a revelation that can suddenly recontextualize this? What are background events that can make the world more interesting? The hard part with background events is it is hard to introduce that a thing has happened and to balance oh wow, this thing changed about the world, and being like, well, Terry mentioned that the Cairn of the Silver Skull was taken over. I guess we're dealing with werewolves. No, that's not what I meant at all. Oh no, you're gonna die. I find that frequently difficult. I do like having what are 3 revelations they could have about people they already know. Again, that case where their fixer has the kids tonight and everyone learns a little bit. The thing I am always looking for is how can I connect 2 threads and how can I make the world more interesting by establishing a new connection between existing elements. So it's one of those things where I say having 3 of these is ridiculous, yet as I had mentioned, part of my first session prep is having 10 of each of them. So instead of having 3 of each for each session is to say that make sure that I always have 2 in the wings and to replenish that pool as needed. And once you've got the character image, once you found like that striking profile picture or whatever to describe an NPC, who that is for is almost irrelevant. The important part is you have that striking picture to run with. And then my last question, how much of the world do you map out?
So I always map out my city, and I always map out, in the case of the World of Darkness, the major players for the type of game that we're going to play. So like in a mage game, I will always know what are the big power players. And there's usually only 1 or 2 in a city because, while I always populate the world with enough mages that there can be mage social interactions. Even just reaching that threshold, you have enough mages in a city that you're like, how is reality stable?
Yeah.
So at the very least, I try to keep the power players down to 1, maybe 2 powerful mages in the city. And then a number of 1, 2 Arete mages that, the characters can get to know and find and be introduced to. So I'll always have some sense of what are the major factions, what are the key players, and then a rough archetype. So like in my current game, I wanted to have kind of an orphan network. And at first it was going to be just a network of orphans. And then I thought, I'm going to end up with a lot of mages in this city. So I made it a network of outcasts. Started out with an orphan mage, and then she started to pull the outcasts from other supernatural groups like Ketif and, outcast changelings, and maybe even a Ronin werewolf or 2, which is a terrible, terrible idea. But, that's kind of the whole thing that's going on with her is she's very driven and has rejected teaching, and she's a problem. I know that there's that group. Have I done write-ups for what those couple of werewolves are? Absolutely not. But I know she's pulling outcasts from all the supernatural groups. So if I need one, I kind of know that's there. It's almost like depth of field with a photo.
Mm-hmm.
I may have a narrow depth of field and I'm focused in on a couple key things, but I can see the smudgy outline of everything else. And if I just shift the lens a little bit and do some more planning, I've got a head start. I don't need to totally reinvent things if the players look somewhere I wasn't anticipating. So that's kind of the level of planning I do. I make all the detailed planning relevant to the genre that's being played. So I don't have any deep planning on changelings or vampires. I know there are a couple out there doing things in my game. That's not where the focus is.
For character-wise, I will generally have 3 factions and 3 agents that are running around in the world doing something that the characters can bump into that I think will be interesting. I play very mage-light games. Again, for the greater Philadelphia area of some 5 million people, I have 9 mages in total-ish, give or take 1 or 2. In my games, mages can move, and I do like the area that there are just states that have no mages in it. There are no mages in Wyoming. That's just how it works. As for locations, I create a bunch of interesting generic locations that can be whatever I need them to be, and I pull them out of my Rolodex as necessary. I spent $15. I got a whole bunch of floor maps on Drive-Thru RPG. If you go to the bundle of holding, periodically they'll do like 400 contemporary floor maps for $8, and you're like, this is far too many, until you need like a nightclub and they don't have one, and you're like, how do they not include one? So like, I have the abandoned Church of the Assumption that has a chandelier that glows without a seeming source of power, and that could be a vampire haven, a entrance to the hedge, because I use Changeling the Dreaming, but like the hedge. So I've managed to split the difference. It could be a homeless encampment, it could be a speakeasy, or it could be a bolt hole without much difficulty. The other thing I try and have is, are there any free agents? Is there a bygone? Is there something weird happening in the spirit world? Are there any cosmological or world-spanning quirks? I have... one thing I eventually want to write up is I kind of like the idea of AR, but I feel that it should exist in the Umbra as well. There are particular locations that can only be reached if you step into the penumbra in particular places, that if you do not step sideways there, you will not enter them. They are kind of bubbles in the gauntlet or areas in the periphery or what have you. You cannot see them from the rest of the penumbra, and I like to include notes on what they could be, and I should probably do an episode on that one at some point. Victor, we've been talking a lot. So do you have any parting thoughts or recommendations or words of encouragement to storytellers that are trying to figure out what preparation looks like?
I think my words of encouragement would be take an approach, plan something, and give yourself leeway to fail a little bit. And as long as you fail up, you do a little better every time, then that's just part of the process. And as long as you have players that are willing to have fun with you and laugh about it as you go, it's really easy to feel a lot of pressure and feel like, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong. I have to do this right. I ran games for years before I did what I considered the cracking the nut, when I got a Chronicle and it worked and I didn't just hit a wall. The first 4 or 5 times I tried to run a Chronicle, it was fine for a little while, and then I hit a wall and I felt like I was failing. And now, when I hit a wall, I reset, and it's okay that one story didn't work. So, we've given a lot of advice in this episode that's more detailed, but I think my big advice would be give yourself some grace to mess up. It's fine. Just do it again.
For me, figure out what you're bad at and prepare ahead of time for that. If you're not a systems person, have your system quick reference or run a game that is systems loose. If you're bad at coming up with names extemporaneously, have that list of 40 names that you can grab from. God bless you, internet. There are any number of random NPC and random character generators. I am particularly bad at coming up with names. Figure out how much of a veil or veneer of professionalism you want to have with your table. I think a lot of people are afraid of preparing because they will have more investment in it if it goes poorly. I totally get that. But I think games will often have some benefit to it. And sometimes you will feel as if you are in a uncomfortable setting between 2 levels of preparation, and you will default back to the one that you did previously. I do think it is pretty continuous in terms of what it can be, especially if preparation is coming up with NPCs, locations, possible plot threads, and so on. That is something where even if you do a little bit, there can be a little bit of benefit. Whereas other people are like, no, I need to have a script, I need to have a flowchart, I need to have set pieces. And as I mentioned, that veneer, figure out the degree to which you are comfortable asking your table what they want. The easiest way to give someone a satisfying emotional beat is to ask them, hey, what would be a satisfying emotional beat? Unless it's a person where if you ask them, it will no longer be satisfying, in which case, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to have fun today. I generally don't say, did you enjoy yourself or something like that, but to say, hey, what would you like to have featured in the next session? Or what's a thing we haven't engaged with that you think it's about time that we do? Or even this quest line is boring. No one seems to be enjoying this quest line. How can we collapse it in such a way that we just kind of zoom to the interesting part? And what is that? To me, the botch is not a problem except for the degree to which it represents the resolution everyone wants just kind of going further into the distance. And sometimes I just don't want that. I would much rather somebody break their arm, take 3 points of health, and then just move forward with the thing. So to me, pacing is generally the concern almost more than anything else. And my last thing is participate in the Mates of the Podcast Discord, where you can answer and ask questions in what I consider to be a relatively welcoming place, because all of us there have been part of that game where we're just like, oh, well, that happened. And with that, Victor, are there any projects that you would like to share with the audience before we roll out?
I don't have any big projects going right now. I've got a couple long-standing older ones that just finding time to finish them up has been a challenge. So I'm not going to jinx it. But right now I'm just getting by.
Go. go get Phoenix Rising if you haven't already. It's a wonderful little Chronicle quick start. I feel like we should have mentioned that. Like the whole idea that there are quick starts out there. Way to bury the lead, Robinson. Friend of the show, Josh Heath, has done Heirs to the Mountains of Madness. Victor has done a Phoenix Rising, which gives you a kind of a template and a bunch of characters which are useful. Get that. They're now NPCs. Congratulations. Yep. They even include art, and links to that will be in the show notes. Victor, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
This has been Mage the Podcast that totally didn't have to re-record this entire outro after I realized that I recorded the first go of it off of my webcam. And if you're asking yourself, did Terry just say webcam? The answer is yes. The show is made possible by our executive producers, who include Joshua Hillerup, Oracle of Prepping for Sessions that involve going to the Umbra; Buck Gregory, Oracle of Prepping for Sessions that involve show-stopping musical numbers; Christopher Phillips, Oracle of Prepping for Sessions that involve combat; the crew of Erebus, Oracle of Prepping for Sessions that involve needing to describe a particular number of specific smells; Mikhail, Oracle of Prepping for Sessions involving preppy-looking preppers; and Jay Widener, Oracle of Prepping for Sessions that involve shopping. Additionally, I'd like to thank our other executive producers: Alex, Alexia, Anders S., Andrew Edelstein, Anand, Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbert, Blake Ryan, Boo, Boogers to the Sixth, Brad the Blue, Bryce Perry, Christopher B., Daniel Cuppen, Daniel Scribner, Dan Svensson, David Roy, Derek Osborne, Derek Semick, Sick, Fraggle George Lara, Gargle Noir, Guy Conan Stewart, Ia Bull, Jason Kennedy, Jason Vines, Jason W. Briggs, Jeff Bryn, John Magnuson, Jolyn Andes, Joshua Heath, Chris Kinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Prohl, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Morgan Aran, Nathan Weaver, Nip Barrow, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klaimanov, Oliver Schindler, Patrick McNamara, Patrick Mulder, Puka G, Rachel Grace, Ralph Scheinhammer, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Rob H., Ryan Kendi, Stam Yoel Tobin, Stephen Carton, Thrice Great, William Connolly, William Martin, and Zach Rules. Our EP shoutout this week is to Oracle supporter Jay Widener, for whom I have composed an cut. These are all the ums I removed in a particular episode, but only the latter 2/3 of it, so in your head, have it repeat an extra 50%. It's kind of long, so I've included it as part of the outro. Thank you for your support. If you'd rather listen on YouTube, search Mage the Podcast on YouTube to find our full library there. If you super liked this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or at Mage the Podcast on Twitter. We have a hop and Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to magethepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. I house cream on this shit. It just appeared to me in a vision and I captured it. Mezzo sopranos, that's the only piece of advice I have, but that's not a really transferable skill.